Ladies and gentlemen, there is a type of person who walks into a room and feels the truth before the truth is spoken. They look at someone's smile and sense what's behind it. They hear a, "I'm fine," and instantly know it's not fine. They watch a couple holding hands and feel the tension. They listen to a friend's voice and detect the crack of something unhealed. And they say something that makes other people uncomfortable. I don't have proof. I just know. When someone says, "I just know," what they're often describing is not magic, not a supernatural gift, and not random guessing. It's rapid pattern recognition. The human brain is a prediction machine. Its primary job is to keep you safe and help you navigate social life efficiently. To do that, it constantly gathers tiny pieces of information: tone of voice, facial tension, pauses, eye contact, posture, word choice, timing, inconsistencies, and it compares those pieces with patterns stored from past experience. Then it produces a feeling, a sense, before you can logically explain it. That feeling is what most people call intuition. This happens because much of social processing is automatic. You don't consciously calculate every signal in a conversation. Your brain does it in the background. For example, you might notice someone says, "I'm happy for you," but their smile is tight, their eyes don't soften, their tone drops slightly, and they quickly change the subject. You may not be able to list those details in the moment, but your nervous system registers mismatch. It flags the interaction as not fully sincere. That flag can feel like knowing without proof. In reality, it is proof, but it's proof in micro details your conscious mind hasn't organized into words yet. Pattern recognition is powerful because humans leak truth through behavior. People can control what they say, but they struggle to control how they say it consistently. They can rehearse a story, but they can't always rehearse their body. They can pretend to be calm, but their breathing, speed, and tension often tell another story. When you've seen enough situations, your brain becomes faster at detecting familiar patterns. It's similar to how an experienced driver just knows when another car is about to change lanes dangerously. They notice small cues, a drift, a slight wheel angle, a speed change, long before a clear move happens. They may not articulate it, but they react correctly because their brain has learned the pattern. This is also why some people are better at it than others. People who are naturally observant, people who listen more than they talk, people who grew up in environments where reading others mattered, they often build sharper pattern libraries. They notice the small shifts: who becomes defensive when questioned, who over-explains, who avoids direct answers, who gets angry when held accountable, who is charming in public but cold in private. These are not one-off moments, they are repeated behavioral signatures. When your brain sees the signature again, it triggers that, "I know this type" feeling. That's not prejudice. When done carefully, it's learning. Another reason intuition feels like knowing is that the brain uses thin slices of data effectively. In psychology research, humans can sometimes make surprisingly accurate judgments from limited exposure, especially on traits like confidence, dominance, emotional state, or sincerity, because those states show up in nonverbal cues. That doesn't mean humans are always accurate. It means the brain is capable of extracting signal quickly. The just know experience is often your brain summarizing data into a single emotional output: safe, unsafe, sincere, insincere, open, closed, trustworthy, risky. It's a shortcut, and shortcuts can be useful, but they must be tested. It's important to understand that pattern recognition works best with repeat observations, not a single moment. One tense smile might mean stress, not jealousy. One quiet day might mean fatigue, not secret hatred. The brain sometimes jumps to conclusions because it wants to reduce uncertainty. That's why mature intuition is not, "I know the verdict." Mature intuition is, "I notice a pattern forming." The stronger your pattern evidence becomes, the more your gut feeling becomes reliable. But the key is humility, because your brain can also misread cues based on context you don't know. Context is everything. A person might avoid eye contact because they're shy, not dishonest. Someone might sound flat because they're exhausted, not uninterested. Someone might pause because they're choosing words carefully, not lying. Pattern recognition can be powerful, but it must be paired with curiosity, otherwise it becomes judgment. The goal is to treat intuition as an alert, not a conviction. An alert says, pay attention, slow down, gather more information. It doesn't say, attack, accuse, punish. A psychologically strong person learns how to translate, "I just know," into observable data. Instead of saying, "You're hiding something," they might say, I noticed you changed your tone when we discussed this, and you avoided answering directly. That shifts intuition from mystery to clarity. It also protects relationships because it keeps the conversation grounded in facts, not assumptions. It allows you to be discerning without being paranoid. So the first keynote is about honoring what intuition actually is. It's your brain doing fast social math, using micro signals and stored experience to detect patterns. It can be a life-saving skill when it helps you notice inconsistency, manipulation, or danger early. But its highest form is not certainty. It is awareness, the ability to sense what others miss, then slow down, verify, and respond with boundaries and intelligence instead of instant accusation. Some intuition is not intuition at all. It's hypervigilance, and hypervigilance is what happens when your nervous system learned, early in life, that safety depended on reading people perfectly. When a child grows up around unpredictable moods, sudden anger, silent treatment, manipulation, criticism, addiction, chaos, or emotional instability, the brain adapts in the most intelligent way it can. It becomes a scanner. It studies tone. It studies footsteps. It studies facial shifts. It studies pauses. It studies the room. Not because the child is dramatic, but because the child is trying to survive. In that environment, missing a signal can mean pain, embarrassment, punishment, rejection, or emotional abandonment. So the brain develops a skill, detect it before it happens. That skill becomes an adult pattern, and it can look like a superpower because you walk into a room and you feel everything. You notice the tension nobody names. You sense when someone's smile is fake. You can tell when a person's energy flips. You hear what's not being said. And sometimes you're right, because you've trained your nervous system like a radar. But here's the cost. Hypervigilance doesn't turn off just because you're safe now. The body keeps scanning even when there's no threat, because it's addicted to certainty. It would rather be exhausted than surprised. It would rather be anxious than unprepared. That's why trauma-based knowing often feels urgent. It doesn't feel like a calm observation. It feels like an alarm. It feels like something is wrong. I have to act now. It pushes you toward immediate conclusions, immediate protection, immediate control. It's not trying to ruin your life. It's trying to prevent another wound. But the problem is, it can mistake normal human behavior for danger. Someone being quiet can feel like rejection. Someone needing space can feel like abandonment. Someone disagreeing can feel like a threat. Someone being distracted can feel like dishonesty. Hypervigilance doesn't just read signals, it interprets them through old pain. This is why people with hypervigilance often struggle with proof. They may not have concrete evidence, but their body feels convinced. Their chest tightens, their stomach drops, their thoughts race, and they call that certainty. The body is powerful, but the body is also historical. It remembers patterns from the past and reacts as if the present is the same story. That's the key psychological detail. Hypervigilance is not only perception, it's prediction, and the prediction is often shaped by what hurt you before. You can spot hypervigilance by how it behaves in the mind. It overanalyzes. It replays conversations. It searches for hidden meaning. It feels uneasy even after reassurance. It needs to check, confirm, verify, test. It looks for tiny inconsistencies and treats them like evidence of betrayal. It assumes motives. They're pulling away. They're lying. They're losing interest. They're judging me, often without enough data. It's not because you're irrational. It's because your nervous system learned that trust is dangerous and closeness can be taken away without warning. Hypervigilance also affects relationships in a specific way. It can turn connection into surveillance. Instead of being present, you're monitoring. Instead of relaxing, you're measuring. Instead of enjoying, you're bracing. You may ask questions that are really disguised accusations. You may test people to see if they'll leave. You may read delays as disrespect. You may treat uncertainty as a threat. And the tragedy is, the more you try to control the risk, the more anxious you become, because control never produces true safety. It only produces temporary relief. This is where people get confused, because they'll say, "But I'm usually right." Sometimes they are right, because hypervigilance can be accurate in detecting inconsistency. But accuracy doesn't automatically mean health. A smoke detector that goes off every time you cook might catch a real fire one day, but it will also keep you living in constant alarm. That's the problem. Hypervigilance can be right and still be harmful, because it steals peace, it steals trust, it steals the ability to stay open without fear running the show. Healthy intuition tends to feel quieter. It says, Something feels off, I'm going to slow down and observe. Hypervigilance feels louder. It says, something feels off, I must protect myself immediately. Healthy intuition leaves room for multiple explanations. Hypervigilance locks onto the worst one. Healthy intuition is paired with patience. Hypervigilance is paired with urgency. That urgency is the giveaway, because urgency usually comes from fear of repeating the past. The path forward isn't to shame yourself for scanning. The scanning once protected you. The goal is to retrain the system so you can still be perceptive without being possessed by fear. That starts with learning to name the difference between a signal and an old wound. What did I actually observe, and what did my mind add? Is my body reacting to this person, or to a memory? Do I have a pattern over time, or just a feeling in this moment? When you practice that, you don't kill your intuition, you refine it. You turn a loud alarm into a sensitive instrument. You keep the awareness, but you reduce the false emergencies. You stop punishing people for crimes you haven't proven. You stop turning love into a courtroom. You stop turning uncertainty into danger. You keep your boundaries strong, but you give your nervous system permission to breathe. The most important skill for people who just know things about others without proof is learning to separate signals from stories, because that single skill decides whether your intuition becomes wisdom or becomes damage. A signal is an observable fact, something you can point to without guessing motives. A story is the meaning your mind creates to explain the signal, and stories can be accurate, but they can also be contaminated by fear, ego insecurity, or past experiences. The moment you confuse a story for a signal, you stop being intuitive and start being impulsive. Signals are concrete. Someone changes their tone when a topic comes up. Someone avoids answering a direct question. Someone repeatedly cancels plans at the last minute. Someone promises something and doesn't follow through. Someone flirts openly while claiming they are committed. Someone becomes defensive when you ask for clarity. Someone's words don't match their behavior over time. These are signals. They are data points you can observe and track. They are not proof of a final conclusion, but they are legitimate information. Stories are what the mind does next. They're cheating. They're using me. They don't respect me. They're jealous. They're planning to leave. They hate me. A story is an interpretation. It might be right, but it isn't automatically right. The danger is that stories feel emotionally convincing. They come with fear, anger, certainty, and urgency. The nervous system prefers certainty, so it grabs the strongest narrative and treats it like a verdict. That is where relationships get destroyed, not because intuition was wrong, but because the reaction was premature. A psychologically strong person doesn't ignore stories, but they hold them lightly. They treat stories like hypotheses, not like facts. A hypothesis says, this could be true, let me gather more evidence. A fact says, this is true, and now I will punish you. When you treat your story as a hypothesis, you stay open to other explanations. Maybe the person is stressed. Maybe they are anxious. Maybe they are ashamed. Maybe they are struggling with something they don't know how to say. Maybe they are distracted. Maybe they are not dangerous, just human. Holding the story lightly doesn't mean you become naive. It means you become accurate. This is also where mature communication comes in. When someone says, I just know you're lying, they are leading with a story. Stories trigger defensiveness because they attack identity. But if you lead with signals, you create a conversation that can actually reveal truth. Instead of, you're hiding something, you say, I noticed when I asked about this. You changed the subject and your tone became sharp. Instead of, you don't care, you say, I noticed you didn't reply for 2 days after saying you'd call, and that left me confused. Instead of, you're jealous, you say, I noticed you made a negative joke when I shared good news, and I want to understand what that was. This is how you convert intuition into clarity. It's not softer, it's smarter. Separating signals from stories also protects you from self-sabotage. Many people destroy trust by reacting to imagined motives rather than actual behavior. They start interrogations. They accuse. They withdraw. They punish. They test. And ironically, their fear creates the very distance they were afraid of. The other person feels attacked, misunderstood, or controlled, so they back away. Then the intuitive person says, see, I knew it. That loop is common, and it comes from treating stories as facts. A powerful technique is to slow down and ask, what did I actually observe, and what am I assuming? This question is like a mental knife that cuts through emotional fog. It forces you to name the signal clearly. If you can't name a signal, you might be in projection. If you can name a signal, you can track it over time. Patterns matter more than moments. A single odd behavior can be a bad day. A repeated behavior is a pattern. Patterns are where discernment becomes reliable. Another key part is understanding that signals can have multiple meanings. Someone withdrawing could mean cheating, or it could mean depression, burnout, shame, overwhelm, or fear of conflict. Someone being overly friendly could mean manipulation, or it could mean a social personality. Someone being quiet could mean dishonesty, or it could mean anxiety. Your job is not to guess perfectly in one moment. Your job is to hold your boundary while you gather truth. Boundaries are what keep you safe while you wait. You can say, "I need consistency," without saying, "You're guilty." You can say, "I'm not comfortable with this," without inventing a final story. The highest level of this keynote is learning that your intuition is an alert system, not a courtroom. Alerts are meant to make you pay attention, not to sentence people. When you separate signals from stories, you keep the gift, the ability to sense subtle shifts, but you remove the poison, the impulse to attack based on fear. You become calm, precise, and powerful. You stop reacting to imagination. You respond to reality. And when you do that, your "I just know" becomes something rare, not paranoia, not drama, but discernment that actually protects you without destroying connection. Healthy intuition has a very specific emotional signature. It is calm, it is clear, and it doesn't need to rush. When someone is truly sensing something real, their body may notice tension. Something is off. Feeling, but it doesn't automatically explode into accusation. It doesn't demand instant certainty. It doesn't force a verdict in the first minute. That calmness matters, because calm intuition is information, while reactive intuition is often fear. A regulated mind can hold discomfort without turning it into a fight, and that is what separates discernment from drama. The first difference is how the feeling behaves in your body. Healthy intuition shows up like a quiet alert. Pay attention, slow down, observe. It's like a dashboard light, not a siren. Reactive intuition shows up like urgency. Confront now. Probe it now. Control it now. Urgency is not always wrong, but most of the time urgency is a sign that your nervous system is trying to protect you from a past wound, not responding to a present fact. When you feel rushed, it's wise to pause, because rushing usually leads to saying something you can't take back. The second difference is how you treat the other person. Healthy intuition doesn't try to win, it tries to understand. It doesn't start with, "You are guilty." It starts with, "I'm noticing something." It focuses on what is observable, tone shifts, evasiveness, inconsistency, repeated patterns, rather than mind, reading motives. Reactive intuition attacks identity. You're lying. You're manipulating. You're cheating. You don't care. Even if those things end up being true, starting there makes truth harder to access, because people become defensive, and defensiveness creates more hiding, more distance, and more confusion. This is why emotionally strong people use clean questions, not accusing questions. Accusing questions are designed to trap. Where were you? Who were you with? Why did you do that? What are you hiding? Clean questions are designed to clarify. Can you help me understand what changed? When I brought that up, your tone shifted. What was happening for you? I noticed you've been less responsive lately. Is something going on? What do you need from me right now? What are we both avoiding talking about? Clean questions don't mean you're naive, they mean you're strategic, because clarity is more useful than conflict. Another marker of healthy intuition is patience with patterns. Mature discernment does not convict someone based on one moment. It watches repetition. It compares words to behavior over time. It tracks consistency. It understands that humans have off days, stress days, quiet days. Reactive intuition makes a final decision based on a single data point. One delayed reply becomes, "They don't care." One distracted conversation becomes, "They're hiding something." One boundary becomes, "They're pulling away." Healthy intuition gives the situation time to reveal itself, because the truth always repeats, and repeated truth is easier to respond to than imagined truth. Healthy intuition also uses boundaries as protection instead of accusations as weapons. This is a major upgrade. Accusations try to control the other person's behavior through fear, shame, or pressure. Boundaries protect your peace regardless of what the other person does. A boundary sounds like, "I'm not comfortable continuing this without clarity. I need consistency if we're going to keep building. If communication goes silent for days, I step back. If trust is broken, I don't stay." If I feel disrespected, I leave the conversation. Notice what boundaries do. They remove your life from the courtroom. You don't need to prove someone guilty to protect yourself. You only need to honor what you will and won't tolerate. This is why healthy intuition doesn't obsess over proving. It focuses on choosing. Reactive intuition tries to get certainty, to eliminate doubt, to force a confession, because uncertainty feels unbearable. Healthy intuition accepts that you may not get full proof immediately, and still chooses self-respect. It says, I might not know everything, but I know how this feels in my body, and I know what I require to stay. That mindset is powerful, because it stops you from becoming a detective in your own relationship, and it stops you from handing your piece to someone else's explanations. A big part of calm intuition is emotional regulation before communication. Strong people don't speak while their body is on fire. They breathe first. They sleep first if needed. They let the initial wave pass, not because they're avoiding, but because they understand that emotional flooding creates distorted thinking. When you're flooded, everything looks like a threat, and you start interpreting neutral behaviors as hostile. Calm intuition is what remains after you regulate. It's the signal that stays even when the panic fades. If the feeling disappears after regulation, it may have been anxiety. If it stays quietly, consistently, it may be a real warning. Finally, healthy intuition respects the difference between suspicion and discernment. Suspicion searches for reasons to distrust. It collects evidence to confirm fear. Discernment searches for truth, even if the truth is comforting. Suspicion feels like scanning, checking, monitoring, testing. Discernment feels like observing, asking, verifying, and setting boundaries. Suspicion turns love into interrogation. Discernment turns uncertainty into a process. Observe, clarify, watch patterns, choose standards. That is the psychology of a strong person, not someone who denies their gut, and not someone who worships it, but someone who uses it calmly, with patience, with clean questions, and with boundaries that keep their dignity intact.